My name is Alias Thompson, and for most of my 62 years, I've been a man of science. I've spent my life peering through microscopes, analyzing data, and questioning everything: God, heaven, the afterlife. These were all fairy tales to me. Or so I thought. It was a chilly Tuesday morning on October 17th when my life changed forever. But before I tell you about that day, let me paint you a picture of who I was. I grew up in a small town called Membra. My parents, John and Martha, were good people, but not particularly religious. We'd go to church on Christmas and Easter, and that was about it. From a young age, I was more interested in how things worked than in who might have created them. By the time I hit high school, I had fully embraced atheism. I remember my biology teacher, Mrs. Finch, introducing us to evolution. It was like a light bulb went off in my head. Here was an explanation for life that didn't need a creator. I dove into science books, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. College only reinforced my beliefs, or lack thereof. I majored in physics and minored in chemistry. The more I learned about the universe, the less room there seemed to be for God. I debated with the campus Christian group, using big words like empirical evidence and scientific method. I thought I was so smart. After getting my PhD, I landed a job at Redwood University. For the next 35 years, I taught physics and conducted research. I got married to my wife, Sarah, and we had 2 kids, Emily and Michael. Life was good, and I felt like I had it all figured out. But looking back, I realized how arrogant I was. I'd scoff at my colleagues who believed in God. How can you be a scientist and believe in fairy tales? I'd say. I even wrote a book called The God Delusion, A Scientist's View. It became quite popular in atheist circles. I remember one particular day, about a month before my accident, I was giving a lecture on the Big Bang Theory. A student in the back raised his hand and asked, "But Professor Thompson, what came before the Big Bang? What caused it?" I smiled smugly and said, "Young man, asking what came before the Big Bang is like asking what's north of the North Pole. It's a meaningless question. The Big Bang was the beginning of time itself." The student looked unsatisfied, but I moved on. I didn't know it then, but I was about to get a very different perspective on the beginning of everything. As I mentioned earlier, it was October 17th when everything changed. I woke up that morning feeling a bit under the weather. Sarah suggested I stay home, but I had an important experiment to oversee. "I'll be fine," I told her, giving her a quick kiss before heading out. The drive to the university was uneventful. I parked my car in my usual spot and made my way to the physics building. As I walked, I noticed how beautiful the campus looked in the fall. The trees were a riot of red and gold, and there was a crisp smell in the air. If I had known what was about to happen, I might have stopped to appreciate it more. I entered the lab and greeted my research assistant, Jake. We were working on an experiment involving high-energy particle collisions. It was cutting-edge stuff, kind of work that could lead to breakthroughs in our understanding of the universe. We spent the morning setting up the equipment. Everything had to be perfect. Around noon, we were ready to start. I remember feeling excited as I stood in front of the control panel. "Ready, Jake?" I asked. He nodded, and I reached out to flip the switch. That's when it happened. There must have been a malfunction in the wiring. As soon as I touched the switch, I felt a massive jolt of electricity course through my body. It was like being hit by lightning. My muscles seized up, and I couldn't let go. I heard Jake yelling, but it sounded far away. The world started to go dark around the edges. My last conscious thought was, "So this is how it ends." Then everything went black. I later learned that Jake had managed to cut the power and call for help. The paramedics arrived quickly, but by then I had no pulse. They worked on me for 13 minutes before my heart started beating again. But those 13 minutes, they changed everything. Because while my body lay lifeless on the lab floor, I experienced something that shook me to my very core. Something that made me question everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the nature of the universe. As I drifted in that space between life and death, I began a journey that would challenge every belief I held dear. A journey that would take me to the very gates of heaven and back. A journey that would prove to me beyond any doubt that there is more to our existence than what we can see and measure. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. Let me tell you exactly what happened during those 13 minutes when I was clinically dead. because what I experienced in that time was more real, more vivid than anything I had ever known in my 62 years of life. And it all started with a light. The first thing I remember after the darkness was a pinprick of light. It was tiny at first, like a distant star, but it grew quickly, expanding until it filled my entire field of vision. This wasn't just any light. It was the purest, most beautiful light I had ever seen. It was warm and welcoming, and I felt drawn to it. As I moved towards the light, or maybe it moved towards me, it's hard to describe. I suddenly realized I wasn't in my body anymore. I looked down and saw myself floating above my physical form. It was the strangest sensation, like watching a movie of myself, but I was the camera. I could see Jake frantically trying to help me. I could see the paramedics rushing in, but oddly, I felt no fear or panic. Instead, I was filled with a sense of peace and calm that I had never experienced before. Then, in an instant, I was moving. It felt like I was rushing through a tunnel at incredible speed, the light growing brighter and brighter as I traveled. I began to hear sounds, beautiful music unlike anything on earth. It was as if every instrument in the world was playing in perfect harmony, creating a symphony that spoke directly to my soul. Suddenly, I emerged from the tunnel into a place of indescribable beauty. I say place, but it was more like a different level of existence. Colors were more vivid, more alive than anything I had ever seen. There were colors I didn't even have names for, blending and shifting in ways that defied physics. As I understood it, the music I had heard in the tunnel was all around me now, but it was more than just sound. I could see it, feel it, almost taste it. It was as if all my senses had been heightened and merged into one. My super sense could perceive everything at once. As I tried to take in my surroundings, I noticed figures approaching me. They were beings of light, radiating love and warmth. As they got closer, I recognized them, my grandparents who had passed away years ago, my childhood dog, Max, and, to my shock, Mrs. Finch, my high school biology teacher who had passed away just last year. They all looked young and healthy, their faces glowing with joy. My grandmother spoke first, her voice filled with love. "Welcome, Elias. We've been waiting for you." I was speechless. This couldn't be real, I thought. It must be some kind of hallucination caused by lack of oxygen to my brain. But everything felt so real, more real than anything I had experienced in my physical life. Mrs. Finch seemed to read my thoughts. She smiled and said, "This is real, Elias, more real than you can imagine. Remember how we used to debate about the existence of God? Well, now you know." I shook my head, still unable to fully comprehend what was happening. But how? How is this possible? This goes against everything I've believed, everything I've taught. My grandfather chuckled. Science is a wonderful tool, Elias, but it has its limits. There are truths that can't be measured in a lab or seen through a microscope. As we talked, I noticed that we weren't using words in the traditional sense. It was more like our thoughts were flowing directly between us, unhindered by the limitations of language. Suddenly, I felt a presence, an overwhelming feeling that filled every part of this strange new reality. I turned and saw a being of light so bright that it should have been blinding. But somehow I could look directly at it without discomfort. I knew without a doubt that I was in the presence of God. The feeling of love that emanated from this being was indescribable. It was like every moment of love I had ever experienced in my life. The day I married Sarah, holding my children for the first time, every moment of joy and connection, all rolled into one and multiplied by infinity. God didn't speak in words, but I understood everything perfectly. I was shown the entirety of creation in an instant. The birth of stars, the formation of galaxies, the delicate dance of subatomic particles. I saw how everything was connected, how every action had a purpose in the grand design of the universe. I saw my own life laid out before me, every choice I had made, every person I had influenced. I saw how my actions had rippled out, affecting people I had never even met. There was no judgment, only understanding and unconditional love. Then God showed me something that shook me to my core. I saw how my teachings, my books, my lectures, denying the existence of God had affected people. I saw students struggling with their faith because of my words, people turning away from the comfort and guidance that belief in a higher power could provide. But even as I felt a deep sadness for the negative impact I had had, I was enveloped in forgiveness and love. I understood that every step of my journey, even my years of atheism, had been necessary to bring me to this moment of understanding. As I stood there, basking in the presence of the divine, I felt a tug. It was gentle at first, but it grew stronger. I knew instinctively that it was pulling me back to my physical body. I didn't want to leave this place. This state of being felt like home in a way Earth never had. But I also knew that my time wasn't up yet. I had work to do, a message to share. God's love enveloped me one last time, and I understood without words that I was being sent back with a purpose. I was to share what I had learned, tell people about the reality of God and the afterlife. As I felt myself being pulled back, my grandmother squeezed my hand. Remember, Elias, remember everything you've seen and felt here. Your life has a new purpose now. The light began to fade. The music grew distant. I tried to hold on to every detail, every sensation. I didn't want to forget a single moment of this incredible experience. Then, with a jolt, I was back in my body. I gasped, my eyes flying open. I was lying on the floor of my lab, paramedics hovering over me, their faces a mixture of relief and surprise. "He's back," one of them shouted. "We've got a pulse." As they lifted me onto a stretcher, my mind was reeling. I had just experienced something that defied everything I thought I knew about the universe. I knew that my life would never be the same again. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital bed. The room was dim. I could hear the steady beep of machines monitoring my vital signs. My body felt heavy, like I was wearing a suit of armor. Every breath was an effort. Sarah was there, holding my hand. When she saw my eyes open, her face lit up with relief. "Alias, oh, thank God you're awake," she exclaimed, tears streaming down her face. I wanted to tell her everything right then and there, but my throat was dry and sore from the breathing tube they had removed. All I could manage was a weak squeeze of her hand. The next few days were a blur of doctors, tests, and worried family members. Emily and Michael flew in from out of state to be with me. I was touched by their concern, but I was also frustrated. I had experienced something incredible, something world-changing, and I couldn't find the words to explain it. It wasn't until the third day that I felt strong enough to really talk. Sarah was sitting by my bed, reading a magazine, when I finally spoke up. "Sarah," I said, my voice still raspy, "I need to tell you something important." She put down her magazine and leaned in close. "What is it, honey? Are you in pain?" I shook my head. "No, it's not that. When my heart stopped, I experienced something amazing." I could see the concern in her eyes. She probably thought I was delirious or that my brain had been damaged by the lack of oxygen. But I pressed on, determined to share what I had seen. I told her everything. The tunnel of light, the beautiful music, seeing my deceased loved ones, and most importantly, encountering God. As I spoke, I could see the disbelief on her face slowly change to wonder. "But Elias," she said when I finished, "you've always been so sure that there's no afterlife, no God. You've built your whole career on it. What changed?" I reached out and took her hand. "I was wrong, Sarah. So very wrong. What I experienced was more real than anything I've ever known. I can't explain it scientifically, but I know in my heart that it was true." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I believe you, Elias. I've never seen you like this. Whatever happened to you, it's changed you." Over the next few days, as I regained my strength, I shared my experience with Emily and Michael. Their reactions were mixed. Emily, always the more spiritually inclined of the two, was fascinated and asked dozens of questions. Michael, who had followed in my scientific footsteps, was more skeptical. "Dad," he said, "have you considered that this might have been some kind of hallucination? The brain does strange things when it's deprived of oxygen." I understood his skepticism. It was exactly how I would have reacted before my experience. But I knew what I had seen and felt was real. "Michael," I replied, "I know it sounds incredible, but I'm telling you, this was no hallucination. It was more real than anything I've ever experienced." As news of my near-death experience spread, I started getting visitors. Colleagues from the university came, some out of concern, others out of curiosity. I could see the disbelief in their eyes as I recounted my story, the same disbelief I would have had in their place. One visitor who particularly stands out in my memory was Dr. Laura Chen, a neuroscientist I had worked with on several projects. She listened to my story with a neutral expression, then said, "Elias, You know I respect you as a scientist, but you must admit this is quite a departure from your previous stance. How can you be sure this wasn't just a product of your dying brain? I thought carefully before answering. Laura, I've asked myself the same question, but what I experience goes beyond any neurological explanation. The clarity, the emotions, the sheer reality of it all. It wasn't like a dream or a hallucination. It was more real than this conversation we're having right now. She nodded thoughtfully. I can see you truly believe this. Would you be willing to undergo some tests, brain scans, psychological evaluations? If what you're saying is true, it could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness and death. I agreed readily. Part of me, the scientist that I had been for so long, was eager to find some empirical evidence for what I had experienced. But another part of me knew that no brain scan or psychological test could fully capture the profound spiritual truth I had encountered. As I recovered, I spent a lot of time reflecting on my experience and what it meant for my life going forward. I knew I couldn't go back to teaching physics as if nothing had happened. My entire worldview had been turned upside down. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself looking out the hospital window at the starry sky. I remembered how I used to view the universe as a vast, uncaring machine governed by physical laws. Now I saw it differently. Each star seemed to pulse with divine energy, each constellation a brushstroke in God's grand canvas. I thought about all the students I had taught over the years, all the people who had read my books or attended my lectures. How many of them had I led away from faith? How many had I robbed of the comfort and purpose that comes from knowing there's more to existence than just the physical world? That's when I made a decision. Once I was well enough, I would dedicate myself to sharing my experience with as many people as possible. I would write a new book, not to disprove God, but to share the reality of his existence and the afterlife. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I would face skepticism, ridicule, maybe even hostility from my former atheist allies. But I also knew that what I had to share was too important to keep to myself. As I lay there, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in my life, I truly understood my place in the universe. I wasn't just a random collection of atoms in an indifferent cosmos. I was a beloved child of God with a purpose and a destiny. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Thank you, God, for opening my eyes. Please give me the strength and wisdom to share your truth with the world. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt more alive and more certain of my path than ever before. My near-death experience hadn't just shown me the reality of the afterlife, it had given my life a new beginning. After 2 weeks in the hospital, I was finally cleared to go home. As Sarah helped me pack my things, I couldn't help but feel like I was preparing for more than just a return to our house. I was embarking on a new journey, one that would challenge everything I had ever known or taught. The drive home was quiet. Sarah kept glancing at me, concern etched on her face. I knew she was worried about how this experience had changed me. To be honest, I was a bit worried too. How does one go back to normal life after encountering the divine? As we pulled into our driveway, I saw our neighbor Tom mowing his lawn. He waved, and I waved back. It struck me how ordinary everything looked, how unchanged the world was when I felt so profoundly different inside. The first few days at home were a period of adjustment. Simple tasks like climbing the stairs or taking a shower left me winded. But as my body healed, my mind was racing. I spent hours in my study, furiously scribbling notes about my experience, trying to capture every detail before it faded from memory. One morning, about a week after I'd come home, I called the dean of the physics department at the university. Dr. Marjorie Simmons had been my colleague for over 2 decades. Her voice was warm when she answered. "Alias, it's good to hear from you. How are you feeling?" I took a deep breath. "I'm feeling much better, Marjorie, thank you. But I need to talk to you about something important." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Of course, Elias, what is it?" "I can't come back to teach, at least not in the same capacity," I said. The words tumbled out in a rush. My near-death experience, it's changed everything. I can't teach physics without acknowledging the spiritual reality I've encountered. "I know how this sounds, but, Elias," she interrupted gently, I've heard about your experience. To be honest, we've all been wondering how this would affect your work. Why don't you come in next week and we can discuss this in person? I agreed, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. The following Tuesday, I found myself walking across the familiar campus. Students hurried past, absorbed in their own worlds. How many of them, I wondered, were grappling with questions about the meaning of life, the existence of God? How many of them had I steered away from finding those answers? Dr. Simmons greeted me warmly in her office. We exchanged pleasantries, but I could sense her curiosity. Finally, she leaned forward in her chair. Elias, I've known you for a long time. You've always been one of our most rational, level-headed professors. So when I heard about your experience, I must admit, I was shocked. Can you tell me more about it? For the next hour, I poured out my story. I told her about the tunnel of light, the reunion with lost loved ones, and my encounter with God. As I spoke, I could see the skepticism in her eyes slowly give way to something else. Not belief, exactly, but a willingness to consider the possibility. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Elias, I can see how profound this experience was for you, but you must understand the position this puts us in. We're a science department. We deal in empirical evidence, not spiritual experience. I nodded. I understand, Marjorie. That's why I can't come back to teach physics as I did before. But what if? What if we offered a new course? Something that explores the intersection of science and spirituality? Her eyebrows shot up. You mean like a philosophy course? Not exactly, I said, warming to the idea. More like an exploration of consciousness, near-death experiences, and the limits of scientific knowledge. We could bring in guest speakers, neuroscientists, psychologists, even theologians. It would be interdisciplinary, challenging students to think beyond the purely physical. Dr. Simmons tapped her pen against her desk, considering. It's an intriguing idea, Elias. Controversial, certainly, but intriguing. Let me discuss it with the board. In the meantime, why don't you put together a formal proposal? I left her office feeling energized. This could be a way to bridge my old life with my new understanding, open minds, and spark important discussion. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into researching and planning this potential new course. I reached out to colleagues in various fields, read countless papers on near-death experiences and consciousness studies, and even started exploring theological texts, something I never thought I'd do. But my mission extended beyond the walls of academia. I started accepting invitations to speak at local churches, community centers, and even a few small conferences. At first, it felt strange standing in front of groups, not to debunk faith, but to affirm it. But as I shared my story, I saw something in the eyes of my listeners: hope, wonder, and sometimes recognition. One evening, after speaking at a local community center, a young woman approached me. Her eyes were red from crying. Dr. Thompson, she said, her voice shaky, I lost my mother last year. I've been so angry, so sure that she was just gone. Hearing your story for the first time, I feel like maybe she's still out there somewhere, waiting for me. I felt a lump in my throat as I remembered my own reunion with loved ones during my experience. She is, I said softly, and she loves you more than ever. The woman broke down then, and I found myself holding her as she cried. In that moment, I understood more clearly than ever why I had been sent back. This wasn't just about proving the existence of God or the afterlife. It was about bringing comfort, hope, and purpose to people who were struggling. As word of my story spread, I started receiving invitations from larger venues, mega churches, major conferences, even a few television shows. Part of me was excited at the opportunity to reach more people, but another part was apprehensive. I didn't want to become some kind of spiritual celebrity. I was still grappling with my own transformation, still learning and growing every day. One night, as I sat in my study working on my book, Sarah came in and sat beside me. She looked at the piles of books, the scribbled notes, the open laptop. You're really throwing yourself into this, aren't you? She said. I nodded, suddenly feeling a bit self-conscious. Is it too much? Am I changing too fast? Sarah took my hand. Elias, I've known you for 40 years. I've seen you passionate about your work before. But this is different. You're not just excited about a new theory or discovery, you're alive in a way I've never seen before. Whatever happened to you in those 13 minutes, it gave you a purpose. Her words touched me deeply. "Thank you for understanding," I said, squeezing her hand. "I know this must be a big adjustment for you too." Des smiled. "It is, but you know what? I like this new Elias. It's softer, more open, and I think I'm starting to believe too." As I held my wife close, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. My near-death experience hadn't just changed my understanding of the universe. It had opened up new depths in my relationships, new possibilities in my career, and a new purpose for my life. I still had a long journey ahead. There were skeptics to convince, complex questions to grapple with, and a lifetime of scientific thinking to reconcile with my new spiritual understanding. But for the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely alive. I looked out the window at the starry night sky, remembering how I had seen it from the other side. "Thank you," I whispered, not sure if I was speaking to God, the universe, or both. "Thank you for this second chance." As the months passed, my new mission began to take shape. The university board, after much debate, approved my proposal for a new course titled Consciousness, Near-Death Experiences, and the Frontiers of Science. It was scheduled to begin in the fall semester, and to my surprise, it filled up within hours of registration opening. Meanwhile, my book was coming along well. I had decided to title it 13 Minutes in Eternity, An Atheist Scientist's Journey to God. Writing it was both challenging and cathartic. I struggled to find the right words to describe my experience and convey the profound love and peace I had felt in God's presence. But with each draft, I felt I was getting closer to capturing the essence of what I had experienced. One sunny Saturday in June, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Laura Chen, the neuroscientist who had visited me in the hospital, showed up at my door. "Alias," she said, her eyes bright with excitement, "I've been analyzing the data from your brain scans, and I found something fascinating." She spread out a series of images on our dining room table. To my untrained eye, they looked like colorful blobs, but Laura pointed out specific areas with enthusiasm. "See this region here? It's associated with feelings of transcendence and spiritual experiences. In your scans, it's remarkably active, even weeks after your NDE. And here," she pointed to another area, "this is linked to feelings of love and connection. Again, it's showing unusual activity patterns." I leaned in, intrigued. "What does this mean, Laura?" She took a deep breath. "Honestly, Elias, I'm not sure. From a purely materialist perspective, we might say this activity is causing your new beliefs. But the persistence and intensity of these patterns are unlike anything I've seen before. It's as if your brain has been fundamentally rewired by your experience. This goes beyond what we typically see in cases of religious conversion or even in long-term meditators." I smiled. "Or perhaps, Laura, what you're seeing is the physical evidence of a spiritual transformation. Maybe science and spirituality aren't as separate as we once thought." She nodded slowly. "I'm beginning to think you might be right. Elias, would you be willing to participate in more studies? I think your case could open up entirely new avenues of research in neuroscience and consciousness studies." I agreed readily. My experience could help bridge the gap between science and spirituality. I was all for it. As summer turned to fall, I found myself busier than ever. My new course had started, and it was unlike any class I had ever taught. We had neuroscientists discussing the latest research on consciousness, psychologists exploring the impact of NDEs on mental health, and even a few theologians offering perspectives on the afterlife from various faith traditions. The students were engaged and curious, asking profound questions that often left me pondering long after class had ended. Many of them came from scientific backgrounds, skeptical but open-minded. Others were grappling with their own spiritual experiences or questions about the meaning of life. One day, a student named Alex stayed after class. He was a brilliant physics major who reminded me a lot of myself at that age. "Dr. Thompson," he said, fidgeting with his backpack strap, "I'm really struggling with all this. I've always believed in the scientific method and empirical evidence, but your story and some of the research we've been studying are making me question everything." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Alex, questioning is good. It's the heart of both science and spiritual growth. You don't have to choose between being a good scientist and being open to spiritual realities. In fact, I'd argue that the best scientists are those who remain open to possibilities beyond our current understanding." He nodded, looking a bit relieved. Thanks, Dr. Thompson. I guess I'm just afraid of where these questions might lead. Don't be afraid, Alex, I said. Be excited. You're at the frontier of human knowledge, asking questions that might just change the world. As Alex left, I couldn't help but reflect on how much I had changed. A year ago, I would have steered him firmly back to materialist science. Now, I was encouraging him to explore the mysteries of consciousness and spirituality alongside his physics studies. My book was published in late November, just before Thanksgiving. To my astonishment, it quickly climbed the bestseller lists. Suddenly, I was being invited onto national talk shows, asked to give keynote speeches at major conferences, and fielding calls from people all over the world who wanted to share their own spiritual experiences. It was overwhelming at times. I wasn't used to this kind of attention, and I often felt out of my depth when trying to answer profound spiritual questions. But I remembered what God had shown me during my NDE, that every step of my journey, including my years of atheism, had been necessary to bring me to this point. One particularly memorable moment came during a live television interview. The host, a well-known skeptic, was grilling me about my experience. "Dr. Thompson," he said, his tone challenging, "you've built your career on empirical evidence and scientific rigor. How can you expect us to believe in something that can't be measured or replicated in a lab?" I took a deep breath, praying silently for guidance. Then I said, "You're right that my experience can't be replicated in a lab, but neither can love, consciousness, or the sense of awe we feel when we look at the stars. Some of the most important aspects of human experience transcend our ability to measure them. What I'm proposing is that we expand our definition of evidence to include subjective experiences, especially when they have the power to radically transform lives for the better." The host looked taken aback for a moment. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not belief, perhaps, but a willingness to consider new possibilities. As the year drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on the incredible journey I had been on. My near-death experience had not only transformed my own life, but had sparked conversations and explorations that were touching thousands of lives. I thought about the students in my class grappling with big questions about consciousness and the nature of reality. I thought about the readers of my book, finding hope and comfort in the idea that death is not the end. I thought about the scientists like Dr. Chen who were pushing the boundaries of their fields to explore the intersection of science and spirituality. On New Year's Eve, Sarah and I decided to have a quiet celebration at home. As we sat on our porch, watching the stars come out, she turned to me with a smile. "You know, Elias," she said, "a year ago, if someone had told me that my staunchly atheist husband would become a spiritual teacher and best-selling author about the afterlife, I would have thought they were crazy." I laughed. I would have thought the same thing. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" She nodded, her eyes twinkling. "It certainly does. So what's next for you? Any more world-changing revelations on the horizon?" I shook my head, smiling. "I think one near-death experience is enough for me. You know what? I feel like I'm just getting started. There's so much more to explore, so many more people to reach." As we clinked our glasses in a toast to the new year, I felt a profound sense of gratitude and purpose. My journey from atheist scientist to spiritual explorer had been unexpected and challenging. It had also been the most fulfilling experience of my life. I knew that more challenges lay ahead, skeptics to convince, complex questions to unravel, and the constant struggle to reconcile scientific inquiry with spiritual wisdom. But I was ready for it all because now I knew with unshakable certainty that there was more to our existence than what we could see or measure. There was a divine love underlying all of reality, a purpose to our lives, and a destiny that stretched far beyond our earthly existence. As the first stars of the new year twinkled above us, I silently renewed my commitment to share this profound truth with the world. My near-death experience had granted me 13 minutes in eternity, but it had also given me a lifetime of purpose, and for that, I was eternally grateful.